You know this feeling. The alarm sounds. Before your eyes fully open, before your feet touch the floor, you remember, there's that meeting today, the one with the colleague who talks over everyone, who dismisses ideas that aren't his own, who somehow makes every interaction feel like a competition you didn't agree to enter. Or perhaps it's a family gathering. The relative who asks the questions designed to sting, the one who remembers your failures with perfect clarity and your successes not at all. Your day hasn't started yet, and already you're bracing. This is where most of us live. Not in the present moment, but in anticipation of difficulty. We rehearse conflicts that haven't happened. We prepare defenses against attacks that may never come. We spend our mornings arming ourselves for battles we've already lost in imagination. Nearly 2,000 years ago, a Roman emperor woke to the same feeling, but he did something unusual with it. Instead of letting the dread fester, instead of pretending it wasn't there, he wrote it down. He made it explicit. He turned his morning anxiety into a philosophical practice.
Begin the morning by saying to yourself, I shall meet with the busybody, the ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful, envious, unsocial. All these things happen to them by reason of their ignorance of what is good and evil.
This is how Marcus Aurelius opens Book 2 of the Meditations, not with denial, not with forced optimism, with acknowledgement. Yes, you will encounter difficult people today, name it, expect it, and then having expected it, prepare yourself to respond well. There's something almost shocking about this advice coming from an emperor. We might expect a ruler to write about strategy, about power, about bending others to his will. Instead, Marcus writes about managing his own reactions. The people around him will be busybodies. They will be ungrateful. They will be arrogant and deceitful and envious. He cannot change this. What he can change is himself. This is the pivot point of Stoic philosophy, and Book 2 is where Marcus first articulates it with full force. Book 1, which we explored last time, was about gratitude. It was warm. It acknowledged debts, named teachers, cataloged the people who shaped Marcus into who he became. Book 2 is different. Book 2 is about facing what's difficult. It's about maintaining equanimity when everything around you seems designed to destroy it. If Book 1 answered the question, who made you? Book 2 answers the question, what will you do with what they gave you? The setting matters. Marcus almost certainly wrote these words during military campaigns on the Danube frontier, surrounded by war, disease, and death. The people testing his patience weren't hypothetical. They were real generals, real administrators, real soldiers with real failures and real demands. The philosophical exercises weren't academic. They were survival techniques for a man trying to hold an empire together while holding himself together. And here's what strikes me most about this opening passage. Marcus doesn't exempt himself from the diagnosis. He'll meet busybodies and the ungrateful, yes, but the reason he gives for their behavior applies equally to himself. They act this way by reason of their ignorance of what is good and evil. They don't know better. Neither, often does he. The practice isn't about achieving superiority over difficult people. It's about recognizing shared humanity with them. This is where we begin today, with Marcus facing his morning, with the honest acknowledgement that difficulty is coming, and with the Stoic question that will echo through everything that follows. Given that I cannot control what others do, what can I control? Given that I will meet the ungrateful, how will I meet them? Given that life includes suffering, how will I suffer? Book 2 is short, 17 brief meditations, some just a few lines. But within those lines, Marcus establishes the practices that will sustain him through 12 books of philosophical exercise. The morning preparation, the view of death, the discipline of distinguishing what's up to us from what isn't, the recognition that time is short, that fame is meaningless, that the only thing that matters is the quality of our character in this present moment. These aren't ideas Marcus invented. He received them from his teachers, from Rusticus and Apollonius and Maximus, from the Stoic tradition stretching back through Epictetus to Zeno of Citium 4 centuries earlier. But in Book 2, we see him applying those ideas to his own life, wrestling with them, making them his own. Let's read together. This is Season 1, Episode 3 of the primary texts. Before we continue, I want to thank those of you who have written in after the first 2 episodes. The feedback has been genuinely encouraging. Some of you have shared how Marcus's catalog of gratitude in Book 1 prompted you to reflect on your own formation, on the teachers and friends and family members who shaped you in ways you'd never made explicit. Others have written about returning to the meditations after years away, finding new depth in passages you thought you already knew. A few of you have pushed back on points I made or asked questions that genuinely made me think differently. This is exactly what I hoped this podcast would become. Not a monologue, but a conversation. Philosophy has always been dialogical. Socrates didn't lecture. He questioned and listened and responded. Marcus wrote to himself, but he was drawing on conversations with teachers, debates within the Stoic tradition, the accumulated wisdom of centuries of philosophical exchange. When you write in, you're continuing that exchange. I'm grateful for it, so thank you everyone who reached out. Now, to the work at hand, we're continuing our exploration of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, reading the text, taking the time it deserves. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. This podcast is freely available to everyone, but I'd strongly recommend going back to episodes 1 and 2 before continuing. Episode 1 introduced Marcus Aurelius himself, the reluctant emperor, the devoted student, the man who spent his reign at war while writing philosophy by lamplight. Episode 2 took us through Book 1, Marcus's extraordinary catalog of gratitude, where he named 17 influences and acknowledged everything he'd received from others. That foundation matters for what we're about to encounter. Book 2 builds directly on Book 1. The teachers Marcus thanked, the virtues he cataloged, the models of excellence he described, all of that becomes the equipment he'll need for what comes next. Apollonius taught him steadiness, Maximus showed him equanimity, Antoninus demonstrated mildness under pressure. Now Marcus faces the test. Can he actually embody what he was shown? Last episode ended with a preview of where we were heading. I read you the opening of Book 2, that famous passage about expecting difficult people. We noted how the tone shifts from warm gratitude to something more combative, not aggressive. Marcus never counsels aggression, but prepared, alert, ready for difficulty rather than surprised by it. Today we'll read Book 2. We'll explore why Marcus begins with difficult people and ends with death. We'll examine the Stoic psychology underlying his practices, and we'll consider how these nearly 2,000-year-old exercises might actually work in a life lived today. Book 2 carries a heading in some manuscripts, among the Quadi on the Gran. The Quadi were a Germanic tribe Marcus was fighting on the Danube frontier. The Gran is a river in what is now Slovakia. If this heading is authentic, it places the composition of Book 2 in the middle of military campaign, probably around 172 CE. Philosophy written at the edge of empire in the spaces between battles. Let's enter that world. To understand Book 2, we need to understand where Marcus was when he wrote it. Not just geographically, but psychologically. What was pressing on him? What demanded these particular reflections at this particular moment? The Marcomannic Wars, a crisis unlike any other. By 166 CE, Marcus Aurelius faced the greatest military crisis Rome had seen in generations. Germanic tribes, the Marcomanni, the Quadi, the Iazyges, and others, were pushing across the Danube frontier. This wasn't mere raiding. In 167, they broke through the frontier defenses entirely, swept through the provinces, and reached Aquileia in northern Italy. For the first time in centuries, enemy forces threatened the Italian peninsula itself. The psychological impact on Rome cannot be overstated. For generations, Romans had believed themselves secure behind their frontiers. The legions held the borders. Barbarians might probe and harass, but they couldn't truly threaten the heartland. That illusion shattered in 167. Citizens of Aquileia, a prosperous trading city, watched Germanic warriors approach their walls. Panic spread to Rome itself. People wondered if the empire might fall. Marcus had been emperor for just 5 years when this crisis erupted. He had no military experience whatsoever. His entire adult life had been devoted to philosophy, rhetoric, and the careful administration of civil affairs. Nothing in his education had prepared him to command armies against determined enemies in unfamiliar terrain. Yet he spent most of the next 14 years on the frontier, personally leading legions, negotiating with tribal chiefs, and trying to stabilize a border that stretched for hundreds of miles through forests and marshlands. The scale of the conflict was immense. At its peak, Marcus commanded operations across multiple fronts simultaneously. The Marcomanni pressed from the northwest in what is now the Czech Republic. The Quadi attacked from the northeast in modern Slovakia. The Iazyges, a Sarmatian people, raided from the Hungarian plain. Smaller tribes joined opportunistically, sensing Roman weakness. Marcus had to coordinate legions scattered across 1,000 miles, deal with supply lines stretched thin, and manage subordinates of varying competence and loyalty. The conditions were brutal. The Danube frontier in winter meant bitter cold, primitive camps, mud that sucked at boots and wagon wheels, disease spreading through crowded quarters. Roman soldiers, many recruited from warmer Mediterranean provinces, suffered intensely. Frostbite claimed fingers and toes. Respiratory infections swept through the camps. The fighting itself was savage, with no quarter given or expected. And then there was the plague. The Antonine Plague, probably smallpox, had already killed millions across the empire by the time Marcus began his Danube campaigns. It arrived around 165 CE, brought back by soldiers returning from a campaign against Parthia in the east. It spread with terrifying speed along the roads and sea lanes that connected the empire. Some historians estimate it killed 5 to 10 million people, perhaps a quarter of the empire's population in affected areas. The plague traveled with the legions. Wherever soldiers gathered, infection followed. Marcus would have watched men die not just in battle, but in their tents, consumed by fever, covered in pustules, drowning in their own fluids. The medical knowledge of the time was helpless. Galen, the great physician, was present during some of these campaigns, but even he could offer little more than comfort and observation. The plague didn't just kill soldiers, it killed farmers, craftsmen, administrators. Tax revenues fell as populations declined. Fields went unplanted because there weren't enough hands to work them. The army struggled to recruit replacements for the dead. Marcus had to conscript gladiators and slaves, a measure that shocked Roman traditionalists. He armed bandits and offered them amnesty in exchange for military service. Desperate times demanded desperate measures. This is the context for Book 2's repeated meditations on death. Marcus wasn't philosophizing abstractly about mortality as an intellectual exercise. He was surrounded by dying men. He watched the plague take soldiers who had survived battle. He saw the young and strong reduced to corpses in days. The impermanence he writes about wasn't a concept to be contemplated in leisure. It was the daily reality of his existence. The heading itself, among the Quadi. Some manuscripts of the Meditations include headings indicating where certain books were composed. Book 2 carries the notation among the Quadi on the Gran. Book 3 carries at Carnuntum. These are the only such geographical markers in the text. Scholars debate their authenticity. Are they original to Marcus, or were they added later by copyists who believed they knew where the books were written? We cannot know for certain, but they're plausible. Marcus did campaign against the Quadi, the Grand Territory. If the heading is authentic, it places Book 2 in the winter of 171 to 172 CE, during one of the most difficult periods of the war. The Quadi were a Germanic people who had long lived beyond the Roman frontier. They had sometimes been allies, sometimes enemies, their relationship with Rome shifting based on circumstances and leadership. By 170, they had joined the general uprising against Roman power. Their territory, heavily forested and poorly mapped by Roman standards, made campaigning difficult. Marcus couldn't simply march legions in battle formation through dense woodland. He had to adapt, to learn a different kind of warfare. Imagine the scene. An emperor in his 50s, far from Rome, living in a military camp surrounded by legionaries. Outside, hostile territory where ambush was always possible. Inside, the endless demands of command. Letters from Rome requiring decisions on matters he couldn't directly observe. Reports from subordinates requiring judgment about situations he hadn't witnessed. Disputes requiring mediation between officers who hated each other. Supplies to be requisitioned, routes to be planned, morale to be maintained, and somewhere in the gaps, late at night or early in the morning, Marcus finding time to write. The Meditations were never meant for publication. They were personal exercises, reminders Marcus wrote to himself. The Greek term for this genre is hypomnemata, notes for oneself. Book 2 reads like the notes of a man under pressure, trying to maintain his center when everything conspires to knock him off balance. The philosophical exercises aren't academic, they're survival techniques. Consider what Marcus had already experienced by the time he wrote Book 2. His adoptive brother and co-emperor Lucius Verus had died in 169 CE. Verus had been a complicated figure, more interested in pleasure than philosophy, but he had been family. Marcus had shared power with him for nearly a decade. Now he ruled alone, and the loneliness of supreme command pressed on him. The Antonine Plague was devastating the empire's population and economy. Cities that had thrived were half empty. Trade routes that had flourished were disrupted. The fiscal system that funded the army was straining under the burden of war and death. The frontier wars showed no sign of ending. Each victory seemed to generate new enemies. Tribes that had been quiet grew restless when they saw Roman weakness. Marcus had been forced to auction imperial possessions to fund the military, selling off palace furnishings, imperial ornaments, even his wife's silk robes. For a Roman emperor, this was humiliating. It advertised desperation. His health was declining. Ancient sources describe Marcus as frail, plagued by stomach ailments that may have been ulcers, sleeping poorly, eating little. He took theriac, an opium-based compound, for his conditions. Modern readers sometimes wonder if his philosophical detachment was partly pharmaceutical. More likely, the theriac helped him function despite chronic pain and stress. And yet he continued, day after day, year after year. The meditations of Book 2 aren't the reflections of a comfortable philosopher in a well-appointed study. They're the survival strategies of someone who could easily have broken down and didn't. This connects to why the book opens with difficult people. Marcus was surrounded by them. Not because Romans were unusually awful, but because any organization under pressure reveals human weakness. When resources are scarce, when stakes are high, when death is close, people become competitive, defensive, and difficult. The generals wanting credit for victories and deflecting blame for defeats. The administrators covering failures and inflating successes. The soldiers complaining about conditions and pay and leadership. Marcus needed techniques for remaining effective despite the constant friction. He also needed techniques for facing his own mortality. Book 2 returns to death repeatedly. Your life is short. Your fame will fade. Nothing you accomplish will last. These aren't morbid indulgences. They're attempts to maintain perspective. If you remember that you're going to die, the insult from a subordinate matters less. If you remember that no one will remember you in a few generations, the desire for glory loosens its grip. Book 2 is philosophy forged under pressure. It's worth remembering that as we read. Now together, let's enter Book 2 directly. We'll read substantially from the text, pausing to explore, explain, and interpret. Remember, we're not summarizing here. We're dwelling with Marcus's words. We've already encountered the opening. Let's read it again, more completely this time.
Begin the morning by saying to yourself, I shall meet with the busybody, the ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful, envious, unsocial. All these things happen to them by reason of their ignorance of what is good and evil. But I, who have seen the nature of the good, that it is beautiful, and of the bad, that it is ugly, and the nature of him who does wrong, that it is akin to me, not only of the same blood or seed, but that it participates in the same intelligence and the same portion of the divinity. I can neither be injured by any of them, for no one can fix on me what is ugly, nor can I be angry with my kinsman, nor hate him.
Let's take this apart carefully. It's one of the most famous passages in Stoic literature, and every clause carries weight. Begin the morning by saying to yourself, this is prescription. Marcus isn't describing what happens automatically. He's prescribing a deliberate practice. Before the day begins, before you're caught up in events, speak to yourself. Make it verbal. Make it intentional. The morning preparation isn't a vague mindset. It's a specific exercise. I shall meet with the busybody, the ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful, envious, unsocial. 6 types of difficult person. Notice the specificity. Marcus doesn't say, I might encounter some challenges today. He names the challenges. the busybody who meddles in what doesn't concern them, the ungrateful who take without acknowledging, the arrogant who consider themselves superior, the deceitful who cannot be trusted, the envious who resent others' goods, the unsocial who refuse the bonds of community. These aren't hypotheticals. Marcus knew people in each category. He probably had specific faces in mind as he wrote. The exercise works better when you do the same. Not difficult people in general, but that particular person in my life who exhibits this particular pattern. All these things happen to them by reason of their ignorance of what is good and evil. Here's the Stoic diagnosis. Difficult behavior stems from ignorance. The busybody doesn't understand that meddling harms both self and others. The ungrateful person doesn't grasp how gratitude enriches life. They're not evil in some cosmic sense. They're confused. They don't know better. This might seem naive. Surely some people choose to do wrong knowing it's wrong. The Stoics would disagree. They held that no one does evil willingly. When someone acts badly, they're pursuing what seems good to them, what seems advantageous or pleasurable. They're simply mistaken about what actually is good. Vice is always, in this sense, a form of ignorance. Why does this matter? Because it changes your response. If difficult people are malicious, you might be justified in hating them. If they're ignorant, hatred makes no sense. You don't hate someone for not knowing something. You might pity them. You might try to teach them. You might protect yourself from harm they cause, but hatred becomes inappropriate. But I who have seen the nature of the good that it is beautiful, and of the bad that it is ugly. Marcus claims a kind of knowledge here. He has seen something the difficult people haven't seen, but notice the humility embedded in the claim. He's not saying he always acts on what he's seen. He's saying he's glimpsed it. The vision creates obligation, and the nature of him who does wrong, that it is akin to me. This is the crucial move. The person doing wrong is kin, related, not alien, not other, not enemy. Marcus uses three phrases to emphasize the connection: of the same blood or seed, participates in the same intelligence, the same portion of the divinity. The first phrase is almost biological. We're all human, the same species, the same basic nature. But Marcus goes further. We share intelligence. The capacity for reason that distinguishes humans from other animals belongs to all of us. The busybody reasons badly, but reasons nonetheless. The arrogant person misuses rationality, but possesses it. And then the strongest claim, the same portion of the divinity. For the Stoics, human reason was a fragment of universal reason, the logos that orders the cosmos. Each person carries a spark of the divine. The difficult person frustrating you contains the same divinity you contain. Hating them becomes, in a sense, hating something sacred. I can neither be injured by any of them, for no one can fix on me what is ugly. Here's the Stoic position on harm. External things, including other people's actions, cannot injure the self in any ultimate sense. They can harm your body, your reputation, your possessions, but your character, your ruling reason, your moral integrity, these remain under your control. No one can make you vicious. No one can force you to respond with hatred. The ugliness of vice can only be self-inflicted. This is a high standard. Marcus isn't saying insults don't hurt or that injustice doesn't matter. He's saying that the deepest you, the part of you that chooses how to respond, remains inviolate. Others can provide occasions for you to damage yourself. They cannot do the damage directly. Nor can I be angry with my kinsman, nor hate him. The conclusion follows from the premises. If the difficult person is kin, if they act from ignorance rather than malice, if they cannot truly injure what matters most, then anger and hatred are inappropriate responses, not because they're forbidden, but because they don't fit the situation. You don't hate family members for not knowing what they were never taught. You might grieve for them, you might set boundaries, but hatred misunderstands the relationship. Let me read a different translation of this same passage. Gregory Hayes renders it this way.
When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they can't tell good from evil. But I've seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own, not of the same blood or birth, but the same mind, and possessing a share of the divine. And so none of them can hurt me. No one can implicate me in ugliness, nor can I feel angry at my relative, or hate him.
The meaning is the same, but notice the differences in texture. Meddling for busybody, surly for unsocial, implicate me in ugliness for fix on me what is ugly. Each translator makes choices that color our reception of the text. Hayes adds something the long translation omits. They are like this because they can't tell good from evil. This makes the ignorance claim more direct. They can't tell the difference. It's an inability, not a choice. Let me offer one more translation for comparison. The Staniforth version, which many readers encountered first, renders the passage this way.
Begin each day by telling yourself, today I shall be meeting with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness, all of them due to the offender's ignorance of what is good or evil. But for my part, I have long perceived the nature of good and its nobility, the nature of evil and its meanness, and also the nature of the culprit himself, who is my brother. Therefore, none of those things can injure me, for nobody can implicate me in what is degrading. Neither can I be angry with my brother or fall foul of him, for he and I were born to work together, like a man's 2 hands, feet, or eyelids, or like the upper and lower rows of his teeth.
Staniforth adds the beautiful image at the end. We are like 2 hands, 2 feet, 2 eyelids, the upper and lower teeth. We're made to work together. Opposing my brother is as absurd as my right hand opposing my left. This image appears elsewhere in the Meditations, and Staniforth has imported it here for emphasis. It captures something essential about Marcus's vision. Human beings are parts of a larger whole, and our conflicts are fundamentally misguided. This matters for practice. When someone frustrates you today, you might pause and ask, do they actually know they're doing wrong? Or do they genuinely believe their behavior is justified, reasonable, even virtuous? Most people, in my experience, believe they're acting rightly. The colleague who talks over others thinks they're being efficient, sharing important insights. The relative who asks stinging questions thinks they're showing interest, perhaps even helping. They're wrong, but they don't know they're wrong. Marcus's morning preparation isn't about excusing bad behavior. It's about preparing yourself to respond to it without being destroyed by it. The difficult people will come, that's certain. Your response remains open. The second meditation, mortality reframes everything. Immediately after the morning preparation, Marcus shifts to death. The juxtaposition isn't accidental.
Let it be your constant method to look at the whole of a man, and in a moment to strip him of his hide. Then, let it be your constant method to strip off the whole of the things which can be affected. And let it be your constant thought that neither in one's own nor in others' body is there anything worth deeming wonderful or beautiful, and nothing even in the human soul but that which is thought worthy of esteem, as is the case in few. And let your constant persuasion be that your own lot is excellent, and that the lot of man is beautiful.
This passage is more difficult, and translations vary considerably. Let me read the Hayes version for comparison.
Remember how long you've been putting this off, how many extensions the gods gave you, and you didn't use them. At some point, you have to recognize what world it is that you belong to, what power rules it, and from what source you spring. That there is a limit to the time assigned you, and if you don't use it to free yourself, it will be gone and will never return.
These are clearly different sections. The manuscripts of the Meditations weren't divided into numbered passages by Marcus himself. Later editors made those divisions, and they don't always agree. What matters for us is the cluster of themes: seeing clearly, recognizing mortality, using time wisely. Marcus wants us to strip away illusions, look at a person and see them whole, remove the fine clothes, the impressive titles, the social masks. What's left? A body that will decay, a soul that may or may not be worthy of esteem, nothing that warrants worship or fear. This sounds harsh, and it is. The Stoics practiced a kind of deliberate disenchantment. They believed most of our suffering comes from investing things with more significance than they actually possess. We fear powerful people because we've built up their power in our minds. We crave fame because we've convinced ourselves it matters. Strip away the illusions and what remains is just reality. Reality is workable. Illusions are what trap us. The reminder of mortality serves the same function. Remember how long you've been putting this off? Putting what off? The work of philosophy, the effort to live well, the practice of becoming who you're capable of becoming. Marcus knows his tendency toward procrastination. He catches himself delaying and he reminds himself, time is limited. Extensions aren't infinite. Eventually the deadline arrives and you've either done the work or you haven't. If you don't use it to free yourself, it will be gone and will never return. Freedom here means freedom from false beliefs, disturbing emotions, attachment to things outside your control. The Stoics believed this freedom was achievable but required effort. You had to work at it. And the time for that work was now, always now, because the future isn't guaranteed.
Every moment think steadily, as a Roman and a man, to do what you have in hand with perfect and simple dignity, and feeling of affection and freedom and justice, and to give yourself relief from all other thoughts. And you will give yourself relief if you do every act of your life as if it were the last.
As if it were the last. This is the Stoic practice of memento mori, remembering death, not morbidly, not anxiously, but practically. If this were your last act, would you do it this way? If this conversation were your final conversation, would you speak these words? The awareness of death clarifies priorities. Notice what Marcus asks of himself. Perfect and simple dignity, affection, freedom, justice. Not complicated, not elaborate, simple virtues, simply enacted. Dignity means carrying yourself as a rational being should. Affection means connection to others, even the difficult ones. Freedom means acting from your own reason rather than external compulsion. Justice means giving others what they're due. Every act of your life as if it were the last. This doesn't mean frantic urgency. It means attention. It means presence. It means not deferring the important because you assume you'll have more time. Marcus adds a warning.
Laying aside, of course, all careless indifference and passionate aversion from the commands of reason, and all hypocrisy and self-love, and discontent with the portion which has been given to you.
A list of things to lay aside. Careless indifference, not caring enough about what matters. Passionate aversion, emotional resistance to what reason shows you should do. Hypocrisy, the gap between what you profess and what you practice. Self-love, not healthy self-respect, but the egoism that places your own interests above all else. Discontent with your portion, resentment at the circumstances you've been given. Each of these is a form of self-sabotage. Each prevents you from doing what Marcus just described, acting with dignity, affection, freedom, and justice. They're not external obstacles. They're internal ones. The enemies are inside. Marcus now issues a challenge.
If you find in human life anything better than justice, truth, temperance, fortitude, and in a word, anything better than your own understanding being satisfied with itself in the things which it enables you to do according to right reason, and satisfied with what is assigned to you by fate without your having chosen it. If, I say, you see anything better than this, turn to it with all your soul, and enjoy that which you have found to be the best.
This is remarkable confidence. Marcus doesn't argue that justice, truth, temperance, and fortitude are the highest goods. He challenges you to find something higher. If you can, pursue it. He's that certain you won't. The four virtues he names are the traditional cardinal virtues of Greek philosophy: justice in relationships, truth in knowledge, temperance in desires, and fortitude in facing difficulty. To these he adds your own understanding being satisfied with itself. Intellectual integrity, knowing that your reasoning is sound, that your choices align with right reason, that you're living consistently. He also includes accepting what fate assigns without your having chosen it. This isn't passive resignation, it's recognizing that much of life arrives unchosen. Your birthplace, your era, your body, your early formation, the events that befall you. Fighting against what's already happened wastes energy. Acceptance frees you to respond well.
But if nothing appears to be better than the very daemon which is established in you, which has subjected to itself all your impulses, and which examines all appearances, and has detached itself from the persuasion of sense, and has subjected itself to the gods, and cares for mankind. If you find everything else smaller and of less value than this, give place to nothing else.
The daemon here is the same divine element Marcus will discuss throughout the meditations. It's the ruling reason, the hegemonicon, the part of you that can examine impressions before assenting, that can choose responses rather than merely react. This daemon has subjected to itself all your impulses. It's not controlled by impulses, it governs them. It has detached itself from the persuasion of sense. The senses report, the daemon evaluates. It cares for mankind. The Stoic sage isn't withdrawn from humanity, but deeply connected to it. Marcus continues with a warning.
For if you once give way and incline to this other thing, you will no longer without distraction be able to give the preference to that good thing, which is your own and your proper good. For it is not right to oppose to the rational and political good anything of a different kind, not the praise of the many, nor power, nor wealth, nor enjoyment of pleasure.
Here's the danger. If you allow something else to compete with virtue for your highest allegiance, you'll become divided. The praise of the many, power, wealth, enjoyment of pleasure, will start claiming attention that belongs elsewhere. You'll try to serve two masters and serve neither well. All these things, even if they seem for a little time to be suitable, suddenly take possession of a man and carry him away. The phrase "for a little time" is key. These things don't satisfy long, but they do possess. They do carry away. The person who seeks fame finds themselves doing things that compromise integrity. The person who chases pleasure finds themselves controlled by appetite. What seemed suitable becomes a prison. Marcus's challenge stands, find something better if you can, but if you can't, and he believes you can't, then commit. Stop the divided heart. Give your whole allegiance to what reason shows is best. The next meditation develops the theme of what we carry within us.
How small a portion of the vast and infinite eternity is assigned to every man, for in a moment it is swallowed up and gone, and how small a part of the whole substance, and on how small a clod of the whole earth do you creep. Considering all this, think nothing great, except to act as your nature leads, and to endure whatever the common nature brings.
Cosmic perspective. The Stoics called this the view from above. See yourself from a great height. See the earth as a small sphere in vast space. See your lifespan as a moment in endless time. What happens to the things that seem so important? They shrink. The insult that ruined your morning becomes invisible from sufficient distance. The achievement you're so proud of becomes imperceptible. The cosmic view doesn't make these things meaningless, it restores them to proper proportion. Think nothing great except to act as your nature leads. What is human nature? For the Stoics, it's rationality and sociality. We're made to think clearly and to live together. Acting according to nature means using reason well and contributing to community. Everything else is secondary. And to endure whatever the common nature brings. The common nature is the cosmos itself. What it brings includes everything external. Health and sickness, success and failure, life and death. These aren't up to you. Endurance is. This is followed by a reflection on what Marcus calls the ruling part, the hegemonicon.
What is the nature of the ruling part of your soul, and what kind of soul you have, and how you use it? For in this consists all that is your own.
The hegemonicon is the central concept in Stoic psychology. It's the commanding faculty, the part of the soul that judges, assents, and chooses. Other parts of the soul handle sensation, impulse, and growth. But the ruling part is distinctly human. It's where rationality lives. Marcus asks himself,
what is my ruling part like? What kind of soul do I actually have? Not what kind do I wish I had, or pretend to have, but actually have. How do I use it?
In this consists all that is your own. Your body isn't entirely yours. It can be taken, harmed, destroyed. Your reputation isn't yours. Others create it and can destroy it. Your possessions aren't yours. They come and go. But your ruling part, the quality of your consciousness, the choices you make, that's yours. That's where you live. The next meditation returns to transience.
Do not act as if you were going to live 10,000 years. Death hangs over you. While you live, while it is in your power, be good.
Blunt. Direct. No elaboration needed. 10,000 years of life wouldn't make vice worthwhile. A single day of life makes virtue possible. The length doesn't matter. The quality matters. And death hangs over you regardless. While you live, while it is in your power, be good. This is the entire Stoic program in 11 words. The time is now. The capacity is yours. The task is goodness. Everything else is commentary. Marcus now turns to one of his most famous images, life as a flowing stream.
Of human life, the time is a point, and the substance is in a flux, and the perception dull, and the composition of the whole body subject to putrefaction, and the soul a whirl, and fortune hard to divine, and fame a thing devoid of judgment, and to say all in a word, everything which belongs to the body is a stream, and what belongs to the soul is a dream and vapour, and life is a warfare and a stranger's sojourn, and after fame is oblivion.
This is Marcus at his most intense. Let me break it down phrase by phrase because each element carries philosophical weight. Of human life, the time is a point. A point has no extension. It's the smallest possible unit. Marcus isn't being pessimistic. He's being precise. Compared to cosmic time, your lifespan is geometrically minimal. The years you think you have compressed to almost nothing when measured against eternity. This isn't cause for despair. It's cause for focus. If time is so limited, why waste any of it? And the substance is in a flux. Your body isn't a stable thing. The matter composing you right now wasn't there 7 years ago. Cells die and regenerate, atoms cycle through. The body you identify as you is more like a river than a rock. It has continuity of pattern, but not continuity of substance. The ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus said you can't step in the same river twice. Marcus applies this to the body itself. And the perception dull. Our senses deceive us constantly. We see what we expect to see. We hear what we want to hear. Memory distorts. Anticipation misleads. Attention wavers. Even when we're trying to perceive accurately, the instruments of perception are imperfect. Epistemological humility follows. How certain can you be about anything mediated through these dull perceptions? And the composition of the whole body subject to putrefaction. The body will rot. This is biological fact, not morbid fantasy. Marcus doesn't flinch from physicality. The elegant vessel you maintain with such care will become a decaying mass. Not in some distant future, but inevitably, possibly soon. The Stoics practiced this kind of reflection deliberately. They called it premeditation of adversity. By facing the worst clearly, you reduce its power to disturb. And the soul a whirl. Even the soul, which the Stoics valued above all else, is not stable in the sense we might wish. It's a whirl, a vortex constantly moving. Thoughts arise and pass. Emotions surge and fade. The continuity we feel is constructed, not given. This doesn't mean the soul is worthless. It means the soul requires constant attention, constant practice, constant care. Left to itself, it spins into confusion. And fortune hard to divine. You can't predict what will happen. The Stoics believed in fate, in a determined universe unfolding according to providence, but they also acknowledged that humans can't see that unfolding in advance. From our perspective, fortune is unpredictable. Prosperity comes and goes. Disaster arrives without warning. Planning is valuable, but not sufficient. You must also be prepared for plans to fail. And fame, a thing devoid of judgment. Here Marcus attacks what many Romans cared about most. Fame, reputation, glory, these were the traditional goals of Roman aristocratic life. But Marcus dismisses fame as devoid of judgment. What does this mean? The people who might remember you will themselves be flawed judges. They'll remember what suits their purposes and forget what doesn't. Even if you achieve fame, it reflects others' opinions, not reality. Why stake your well-being on something so unreliable? Everything which belongs to the body is a stream, the summation of the physical, flow, change, impermanence. Nothing you can touch or measure remains static. And what belongs to the soul is a dream and vapor. Here Marcus extends impermanence to the psychological. Your thoughts, your emotions, your sense of self, these too are insubstantial. Dreams fade upon waking. Vapor disperses in air. The inner life feels solid but isn't. And life is a warfare and a stranger's sojourn. Two metaphors. Warfare. Life involves conflict, struggle, the need for discipline and vigilance. Not necessarily combat against others, but combat against your own tendencies toward vice, laziness, distraction. Stranger's sojourn. You're passing through. This isn't your permanent home. The Stoics thought of earthly life as a temporary assignment. You're stationed here for a while, given tasks to complete, then recalled. And after fame is oblivion. Even the fame you might achieve won't last. Eventually, everyone who remembers you will die. Then everyone who remembers them. The chain of memory has finite links. At the end, oblivion. Complete forgetting. As if you had never been. Let me read the Hayes translation of this same passage for comparison.
Time is a river, a violent current of events, glimpsed once and already carried past us, and another follows and is gone. Everything that happens is as familiar and unexceptional as the rose in spring or the fruit in fall. Sickness, death, slander, intrigue, all of it. And what seems worthy of our satisfaction is empty and corrupt and paltry. Dogs snarling at each other, children squabbling, laughing, then bursting into tears. Loyalty, shame, justice, truth, fled up to Olympus from the earth.
Hayes actually combines multiple meditations here, which later editors separated. His version emphasizes the violence of time's river and adds the vivid images of dogs snarling and children squabbling. The philosophical point remains: everything passes, nothing satisfies, even virtues seem to have abandoned earthly life. That last phrase, fled up to Olympus from the earth, echoes the ancient Greek poet Hesiod's description of the degeneration of the human race through successive ages: gold, silver, bronze, and iron. In the Iron Age, the current age, even the goddess Justice has abandoned humanity and fled to the heavens. Marcus knows his classical references. He's placing himself in a tradition of lament for human fallibility that stretches back centuries. But notice, Marcus doesn't stop at lament. The Stoics weren't pessimists. They used these stark recognitions to motivate practice. If time is a river carrying everything away, then what matters is how you act in this moment, the only moment you actually have. If fame is oblivion, then you're freed from the exhausting pursuit of others' approval. The bleak picture liberates rather than crushes. The necessity of self-observation. Before Marcus offers his answer to impermanence, he pauses to make a crucial point about inner observation.
Those who do not observe the movements of their own souls must of necessity be unhappy.
A single sentence, but it carries immense weight. Must of necessity. Not might be unhappy, not tend toward unhappiness, but must of necessity be unhappy. The connection is absolute. What does it mean to observe the movements of your own soul? The Greek word Marcus uses for movements is kinesis, the same word from which we get kinetic. The soul moves. Thoughts arise and pass, emotions surge and fade, impulses come and go. The question is whether you notice these movements as they happen. The untrained person is moved by their soul without awareness. Anger arises and they speak harshly. Desire arises and they reach for the object. Fear arises and they flee. The movement and the action are simultaneous. There's no gap, no space for choice. The trained person, by contrast, observes the movement before acting on it. They notice anger arising. They feel its heat, its pressure, its insistence, but they don't immediately speak. they watch. In that watching, options appear. They can respond rather than react. This is the practice the Stoics called prosoche, attention to oneself. It's the foundation of everything else Marcus recommends. Without it, the morning preparation is impossible. Without it, the examination of impressions can't happen. And without it, the cosmic perspective remains merely intellectual, must of necessity be unhappy. Because without self-observation, you're at the mercy of whatever movements arise. You're a leaf in the wind of your own psyche. Happiness requires the kind of self-governance that only becomes possible when you know what's happening inside you. What then can serve as guide? After this catalog of impermanence, Marcus asks the crucial question, what remains? What can we rely on?
What then is that which is able to conduct a man? One thing, and only one, philosophy. But this consists in keeping the daemon within a man free from violence and unharmed, superior to pains and pleasures, doing nothing without purpose, nor yet falsely and with hypocrisy, not feeling the need of another man's doing or not doing anything, and besides, accepting all that happens and all that is allotted as coming from thence, wherever it is, from whence he himself came, and finally, waiting for death with a cheerful mind, as being nothing else than a dissolution of the elements of which every living being is compounded.
Here's the Stoic answer to impermanence, philosophy. But Marcus means something specific by philosophy, not academic study, not the accumulation of doctrines, but a way of living. Philosophy as a practice of keeping the inner daemon free. The daemon here is the divine element in the soul, the rational part that connects humans to universal reason. In Greek thought, each person has a daemon, a kind of guardian spirit or divine spark. For the Stoics, this became identified with the hegemonikon, the ruling reason. Keeping the daemon free from violence and unharmed means protecting your rationality from disturbance. Superior to pains and pleasures, not indifferent to them but not controlled by them. Pleasure and pain happen, they're natural responses to circumstances, but they shouldn't determine your choices. A Stoic feels pain and continues doing what's right. A Stoic experiences pleasure and doesn't become enslaved to pursuing more. Doing nothing without purpose, intentionality. Every action should serve some rational end. The Stoics distinguish between actions that express virtue and actions that merely occur. Mindless activity is empty. Purposeful action, even if it fails, has dignity. Nor yet falsely and with hypocrisy. Integrity. The outer life should match the inner. What you profess, you should practice. The gap between public face and private reality, which Marcus would have seen constantly in political life, is itself a form of corruption. Not feeling the need of another man's doing or not doing anything. Independence. Your well-being shouldn't depend on others behaving in particular ways. This connects to the morning preparation. Expect difficult people, and don't require them to change for you to be okay. Accepting all that happens and all that is allotted, as coming from thence, wherever it is, from whence he himself came. Fate, providence, the universe unfolds as it must. What comes to you comes from the same source that created you. Resisting fate is futile and foolish. Accepting it is wisdom. Waiting for death with a cheerful mind. Not dreading, not craving, but waiting cheerfully. Death is certain, the timing isn't. A cheerful attitude toward this reality reflects understanding. Death isn't evil, it's natural. It's the dissolution of elements that temporarily composed you back into the elements from which they came. Being nothing else than a dissolution of the elements of which every living being is compounded. Demystification. Death isn't a mysterious passage to another realm, it's chemistry. The body separates into component parts. The soul, if it survives at all, and the Stoics had various views on this, returns to the cosmic fire from which it came. Nothing to fear, nothing even especially significant, just dissolution and recombination. This passage is Marcus's positive program. Given that everything passes, given that body and soul are impermanent, given that fortune is unpredictable and fame is empty, what remains? Philosophy remains, the practice of keeping your inner daemon free, the cultivation of purpose, integrity, acceptance, and cheerful waiting. The worthlessness of fame. Marcus returns to the theme of fame with greater specificity.
How quickly all things disappear, in the universe the bodies themselves, but in time the remembrance of them. And of what nature are all sensible things, and particularly those which attract with the bait of pleasure, or terrify by pain, or are noised abroad by vapoury fame. How worthless and contemptible and sordid and perishable and dead they are.
How quickly all things disappear. Speed is the emphasis, not just that things pass, but how rapidly they pass. The body you're so attached to will be gone soon. The memory of that body will follow. Even sensible things, things you can perceive and touch, the pleasures that attract you, the pains that terrify you, the fame that makes noise, all of it worthless, contemptible, sordid, perishable, dead. The language is deliberately harsh. Marcus isn't being balanced here. He's counteracting his own attachments by overcorrecting. We naturally overvalue pleasure, fear pain too much, crave fame excessively. The corrective must be strong enough to offset these natural tendencies.
What are those things that now employ our minds? Are they worth deeming serious? Are they not like the toys of children? And is not existence itself in a state of flux? What then remains? Philosophy. By this, we can get power to keep the divine spirit within us uninjured and unshamed, superior to pleasures and pains.
Marcus asks himself, what am I thinking about? Is it worth taking seriously? Or am I like a child absorbed in toys? The comparison is pointed. Children believe their games matter intensely. Adults know better. But do adults actually behave differently? We have our own toys: status, money, approval, winning. From sufficient distance, these look as arbitrary as children's games. The answer, again, is philosophy, not as escape, but as perspective. Philosophy allows you to see the toys as toys. It doesn't forbid engagement with the world. It changes the quality of engagement. You play the games, but you remember their games. Let me read another translation of Marcus's meditation on fame, this time from the long translation.
Consider the past ages of change, which have already occurred, and you may discern the future too, for it will be wholly similar, and it cannot diverge from the rhythm of present events. Hence, to have studied human life for 40 years, or 10,000, is the same thing. For what more could you see?
This is a remarkable claim. 40 years or 10,000, the same thing. Why? Because human nature doesn't change. The patterns repeat. Different individuals act out the same dramas. Different civilizations rise and fall in similar ways. If you've paid attention for 40 years, you've seen everything significant. Additional centuries would just be variations on themes you already know. This might seem to counsel cynicism. Why bother if nothing changes? But Marcus draws a different conclusion. If human nature is stable, then the wisdom traditions of the past remain relevant. What Socrates learned about virtue still applies. What Epictetus taught about freedom still holds. You're not reinventing understanding from scratch. You're joining a conversation that's been ongoing for millennia.
He who has seen present things has seen all, both everything which has taken place from all eternity, and everything which will be for time without end. For all things are of one kin and of one form.
All things are of one kin and of one form. This is Stoic metaphysics condensed. The universe is unified. Everything connects. The diversity of appearances conceals underlying unity. A person who sees deeply into any present moment sees, in principle, everything that was and will be. Not the specific details, but the patterns, the forms, the nature of reality itself. This connects to the Stoic concept of eternal recurrence. The universe, in Stoic cosmology, goes through cycles. It begins from fire, differentiates into the world we know, eventually returns to fire, and begins again. Everything that happens has happened before and will happen again. The specific you has existed in previous cycles and will exist in future ones, playing out the same life. Modern readers often find this doctrine strange, but notice its psychological effect. If everything recurs, then this moment is eternal. The choices you make aren't temporary, they're written into the structure of reality forever. That should intensify attention, not diminish it. Nature and what follows nature. Marcus considers what it means to follow nature.
Frequently consider the connection of all things in the universe and their relation to one another. For in a manner, all things are implicated with one another, and all in this way are friendly to one another. For one thing comes in order after another, and this is by virtue of the active movement and mutual conspiration and the unity of the substance.
The connection of all things. Stoic physics taught that the universe is a single living organism. Every part relates to every other part. What happens in one region affects all regions. The metaphor of a web captures something of this. Pull one strand, and the whole web trembles. All in this way are friendly to one another. Friendship here doesn't mean conscious affection. It means harmonious relationship, appropriate fit. The parts of the universe support each other. Even apparent conflicts serve the whole. Even destruction enables new creation. The cosmic friendship is impersonal but real. One thing comes in order after another. Causation, sequence. Everything follows from what came before and produces what comes after. There's no chaos, no randomness, no event without cause. The appearance of disorder reflects limited perspective. From the God's eye view, everything is order. Active movement and mutual conspiration and the unity of the substance. Technical Stoic vocabulary. Active movement refers to the pneuma, the fiery breath that animates the universe. Mutual conspiration means everything works together, breathes together. Unity of substance means the universe is made of one stuff, differentiated but not divided. Why does this matter practically? Because it grounds acceptance. If everything connects, if everything follows necessarily from what came before, if the universe is a unified organism, then fighting your circumstances is fighting reality itself. Acceptance becomes not resignation, but alignment. You participate in the whole, rather than struggling against it.
Adapt yourself to the things with which your lot has been cast, and the men among whom you have received your portion. Love them, but do it truly, from the heart.
The things with which your lot has been cast, your specific circumstances, not the circumstances you would have chosen, but the ones you actually have, the health you possess, the position you hold, the challenges you face. These are your lot. Adapting to them is wisdom. The men among whom you have received your portion, your specific community. Not the ideal community, but the real one, the people actually present in your life. Marcus is thinking of his own situation, the generals, administrators, family members, and soldiers who surround him. These are the people he must work with. Wishing for different people is pointless. Love them, but do it truly, from the heart. Not pretend love, not strategic affection, but genuine love. This is the hard part, loving people who disappoint you, loving people who irritate you, loving the busybody and the ungrateful. Marcus sets himself this standard knowing he'll often fall short. The next meditation distinguishes what's truly human from what merely happens to humans.
Every instrument, tool, vessel, if it does that for which it has been made, is well, and yet he who made it is not there. But in the things which are held together by nature, there is within, and there abides in them, the power which made them. Wherefore, the more is it fit to reverence this power, and to think that if you live and act according to its will, everything in you is in conformity with intelligence. And thus also in the universe, the things which belong to it are in conformity with intelligence.
A comparison between artifacts and natural things. A tool is good if it does what it was made to do, even though the maker isn't present inside it. But natural things, including human beings, contain the power that made them. The maker is within. For the Stoics, this inner power is the logos, universal reason, which we carry as our ruling faculty. If you live and act according to its will, everything in you is in conformity with intelligence. Living according to nature means living according to the reason that pervades both you and the universe. You're not following an external standard. You're actualizing what you already contain. This grounds Stoic ethics and metaphysics. Why should you be rational? Because rationality is your nature. Why should you be virtuous? Because virtue is reason applied to action. The should isn't arbitrary. It follows from what you actually are. One of Book 2's most vivid passages addresses anger.
Though you should be going to live 3,000 years, and as many times 10,000 years, still remember that no man loses any other life than this which he now lives, nor lives any other than this which he now loses. The longest and shortest are thus brought to the same. For the present is the same to all, though that which perishes is not the same, and so that which is lost appears to be a mere moment.
The arithmetic of mortality. Whether you live 80 years or 8,000, you only ever lose the present moment. The past is already gone. The future doesn't exist yet. Only now is real, and now is always the same length for everyone, instantaneous. This is meant to dissolve the fear of death. You're not losing some vast treasury of future years. You're only losing the moment you're always losing anyway, now. The person who dies at 20 and the person who dies at 90 lose the same thing at the moment of death. Both lose the present.
Think often on the rapidity with which things pass by and disappear, both the things which are and the things which are produced. For substance is like a river in a continual flow, and the activities of things are in constant change, and the causes work in infinite varieties, and there is hardly anything which stands still.
More river imagery. The substance of things flows, activities change constantly, causes multiply infinitely, nothing stands still. Even what appears stable is actually moving just slowly enough that we don't notice. And then the burst of rage passage.
Do not disturb yourself by thinking of the whole of your life. Let not your thoughts at once embrace all the various troubles which you may expect to befall you, but on every occasion ask yourself, what is there in this which is intolerable and unbearable? For you will be ashamed to confess. In the next place, remember that neither the future nor the past pains you, but only the present. But this is reduced to a very little, if you only circumscribe it, and chide your mind if it is unable to hold out against even this.
Practical psychology. Don't overwhelm yourself by imagining all possible troubles simultaneously. Take each moment as it comes. Ask, is this specific thing unbearable? Usually it isn't. What's unbearable is the accumulated weight of imagined suffering. Strip that away, and you can handle the present. Neither the future nor the past pains you, but only the present. The past exists only in memory. The future exists only in anticipation. Neither memory nor anticipation is the thing itself. If you can reduce your attention to this present moment, you reduce the surface area for pain. The Hayes translation renders this advice vividly.
Don't let your imagination be crushed by life as a whole. Stick with the situation at hand and ask, why is this so unbearable? Why can't I endure it? You'll be embarrassed to answer. Then remind yourself that past and future have no power over you, only the present, and even that can be minimized. Just mark off its limits.
Mark off its limits. The present moment, when you actually examine it, is tiny, a breath, a heartbeat, a single thought. You can endure anything for one breath. Then you take another breath, and that becomes the new present to endure. String together enough endured breaths, and you've survived the catastrophe. Having shown us how to mark off the limits of the present, Marcus now delivers one of his most radical formulations.
Everything is only opinion.
4 words in English, in Greek just 2. Panta hupolepsis. Everything is opinion, everything is interpretation, everything is the story we tell ourselves about what happens. This might seem like relativism, but Marcus doesn't mean that nothing is true. He means that what we experience isn't raw reality. It's reality processed through judgment. The event happens, then we judge the event. The suffering comes from the judgment, not the event itself. A colleague criticizes your work. That's the event. Then you add the interpretation. He thinks I'm incompetent. Everyone will think I'm incompetent. My career is over. I'm worthless. The spiral continues, each thought building on the last, until you're miles away from what actually happened. What actually happened was words in the air. What you experience is a catastrophe. Everything is only opinion. This is liberation, not limitation. If your suffering is constructed from opinions, then changing the opinions changes the suffering, not the event. The event already happened. You can't undo it. But the opinion is still forming. You can still choose it. The Hayes translation renders this meditation as part of a longer passage, adding context.
Everything is in flux, and you too will alter in the whirl and perish, and the world as well. Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth.
Not a fact. Not the truth. Pretty strong language, but notice. Marcus isn't saying facts and truth don't exist. He's saying what we hear and see isn't automatically either one. It's processed. It's interpreted. It's shaped by the receiver. This is liberation disguised as limitation. Yes, you don't have direct access to unmediated reality, but this means your suffering isn't caused by reality directly. It's caused by your opinions about reality, and opinions are yours. You can work with them. Everything is only opinion. Carry this with you. The next time something upsets you, pause and ask, what opinion am I holding here? What judgment have I added to what actually happened? Is that judgment necessarily true? Could I judge differently?
Does Panthea or Pergamus now sit by the tomb of Verus? Does Chabrias or Diotimus sit by the tomb of Hadrian? That would be ridiculous. Well, suppose they did sit there. Would the dead be conscious of it? And if the dead were conscious, would they be pleased? And if they were pleased, would that make the mourners immortal? Was it not fated that these in their turn should become old men and old women and then die? What then would those do after these were dead?
Marcus names specific people. Panthea and Pergamus were associated with Lucius Verus, Marcus's deceased co-emperor. Chabrias and Diotimus were associated with the emperor Hadrian, Marcus's adoptive grandfather. The names anchor the reflection in reality. These were real mourners for real emperors. And now, they're dead too. The argument telescopes grief into absurdity. Even if the mourners sat eternally at the tomb, it wouldn't benefit the dead, who are unconscious. Even if the dead could know about it, they wouldn't be helped by knowledge. Even if it somehow pleased the dead, that pleasure wouldn't prevent the mourners from eventually dying themselves. The mourning accomplishes nothing. This might seem callous. Marcus isn't opposing grief as a human response. He's opposing grief as a permanent condition, as an attachment that prevents living. Mourn appropriately, then move on. The dead don't benefit from your continued suffering.
All this is smell and blood in a bag. Consider that if atoms exist, then atomism is true, and if there is a unity, then there are no atoms, but continuity, the one or the other. But if the latter, then the universe is a unity and an order.
Smell and blood in a bag. The body reduced to its crude physical reality. Not beautiful, not dignified, just biological material. Marcus uses this kind of deflating description throughout the meditations. It's designed to reduce attachment to physical beauty, whether your own or others. The philosophical aside about atoms versus unity references the two main physical theories available to Marcus. Epicurean atomism held that everything is composed of tiny, indivisible particles moving through void. Stoic physics held that the universe is a continuous, unified substance. Marcus favors the Stoic view. If the latter, then the universe is a unity and an order. This matters because unity implies providence. If the universe is one continuous substance, animated by one rational principle, then everything that happens is part of one coherent plan. Random atoms offer no such comfort. Marcus chooses the philosophy that makes acceptance rational. The 3,000 Years Meditation. We come now to one of Marcus's most powerful meditations on time.
Consider, for example, the times of Vespasian. You will see all these things: people marrying, bringing up children, sick, dying, warring, feasting, trafficking, cultivating the ground, flattering, obstinately arrogant, suspecting, plotting, wishing for some to die, grumbling about the present, loving, heaping up treasure, desiring consulship, kingly power. Well then, that life of these people no longer exists anywhere.
Marcus lists the activities of ordinary human life: marriage, child-rearing, sickness, death, war, celebration, commerce, farming, politics. The specific names may change, but the activities repeat. Vespasian's Rome looked much like Marcus's Rome. The people who seemed so alive then are now utterly gone. That life of these people no longer exists anywhere.
Again, remove to the times of Trajan. Again, all is the same. Their life too is gone. In like manner view also the other epochs of time and of whole nations, and see how many after great efforts soon fell, and were resolved into the elements.
Trajan reigned about 60 years before Marcus. Already, all traces of those people have vanished. Marcus extends the reflection to whole nations. Civilizations rise, flourish, and dissolve. The great efforts that seemed so important at the time resolve into nothing. Elements return to elements.
But chiefly, you should think of those whom you have yourself known distracted about idle things, neglecting to do what was in accordance with their proper constitution, and to hold firmly to this, and to be content with it.
And now Marcus applies the lesson personally. Not just emperors from history, but people he knew. People distracted by trivialities, people who neglected what actually mattered, people who failed to do what their nature required and to find contentment in that alignment. To hold firmly to this and to be content with it. This is living according to reason, fulfilling your proper nature. You don't need anything else for contentment: fame, wealth, pleasure. These are extras at best, distractions at worst. What you need is alignment with your nature. That's available to everyone, regardless of external circumstances.
And herein it is necessary to remember that the attention given to everything has its proper value and proportion. For thus you will not be dissatisfied if you apply yourself to smaller matters no further than is fit.
Proportion. Give each thing the attention it deserves, no more. Small matters deserve small attention. We suffer when we give disproportionate attention to things that don't warrant it. The insult that ruined your day probably deserved 5 minutes of consideration, not 5 hours of rumination. The achievement you're obsessing over probably isn't as significant as it feels. Proper proportion restores sanity. Near the end of Book 2, Marcus offers a concentrated summary of Stoic practice.
No longer let your breathing only act in concert with the air which surrounds you, but let your intelligence also now be in harmony with the intelligence which embraces all things. For the intelligent power is no less diffused in all parts, and pervades all things for him who is willing to draw it to him, than the aerial power for him who is able to respire.
A beautiful analogy. Breathing happens naturally. Air surrounds us, fills us, sustains us without effort. Marcus says intelligence and universal reason is equally available. It pervades everything. The only requirement is willingness to receive it. Just as you draw breath, you can draw wisdom. Just as air is everywhere available, so is the Logos. For him who is willing to draw it to him. Willingness is the condition. The universe offers wisdom constantly, but you must be receptive. Distraction, attachment, passion, these close you off. Attention, detachment, equanimity, these open you to what's always available. This is followed by one of my favorite passages in Book 2.
Generally, wickedness does no harm at all to the universe, and particularly, the wickedness of one man does no harm to another. It is only harmful to him who has it in his power to be released from it, and yet chooses to continue in it.
Wickedness does no harm at all to the universe. the cosmos as a whole cannot be damaged by human vice. The providential order continues regardless. This might seem to trivialize wickedness, but that's not Marcus's point. He's trying to release us from cosmic anxiety. The universe is not in danger from bad people. The structure holds. The wickedness of one man does no harm to another. This is the more controversial claim. Surely others can harm us? Marcus would distinguish. Others can harm your body, your possessions, your reputation. These are externals. Your soul, your character, your ruling reason, these can only be harmed by yourself. When someone wrongs you, they damage themselves. The harm they inflict on you is only to externals. It is only harmful to him who has it in his power to be released from it and yet chooses to continue in it. The harm of vice falls on the vicious person. They suffer from their own corruption. And here's the key. They have the power to be released. Vice isn't fate. Anyone can change. The choice to continue is just that, a choice. Marcus leaves open the possibility of transformation. Marcus now presents a catalog of how the soul harms itself.
The soul of man does violence to itself, first of all, when it becomes an abscess, and as it were, a tumour on the universe, so far as it can. For to be vexed at anything which happens is a separation of ourselves from nature, in some part of which the natures of all other things are contained.
The imagery is medical and visceral, an abscess, a tumor. The soul that fights against what happens becomes a growth on the body of the cosmos, separated from the healthy tissue, creating its own isolated pocket of disturbance. Why abscess? Why tumor? Because these conditions separate tissue from the body's normal functioning. They create pockets where the organism's order breaks down. The soul that resists reality does the same to the cosmic order. It refuses to participate in the whole. It insists on its own separate agenda. To be vexed at anything which happens is a separation of ourselves from nature. The universe unfolds as it unfolds. To be vexed, to resist, to complain, is to separate yourself from that unfolding. You're saying this should not be, but it is. Your separation doesn't change what is. It only damages you. Marcus continues his catalog.
In the second place, the soul does violence to itself when it turns away from any man, or even moves towards him with the intention of injuring, such as are the souls of those who are angry.
Turning away from others, moving toward them to harm, these are violences against the soul, not just against the person turned from or moved against, but against your own soul. Why? Because humans are made for connection. Rationality is shared. Withdrawal from human fellowship or attack upon it contradicts what you are.
In the third place, the soul does violence to itself when it is overpowered by pleasure or by pain.
Overpowered, not touched by pleasure or pain. The Stoics didn't advocate anesthesia. They acknowledged that pleasure and pain are natural, but being overpowered by them, losing rational control, making choices dictated by their demands rather than by reason, this is self-violence.
In the fourth place, when it plays a part and does or says anything insincerely and untruly.
Hypocrisy, the gap between appearance and reality, between words and beliefs, between public performance and private truth. This too is violence against the soul, not against others who may never know the deception, but against yourself. You fragment yourself. You become multiple where you should be one.
In the fifth place, when it allows any act of its own and any movement to be without an aim, and does anything thoughtlessly and without considering what it is, it being right that even the smallest things be done with reference to an end.
Aimlessness, random action, thoughtless motion. Even small things, Marcus insists, should be done with reference to an end. Purpose should pervade everything. Action without purpose wastes the soul's capacity. It treats the rational faculty as if it weren't rational, as if it didn't need direction.
And the end of rational beings is to follow the reason and the law of the most ancient city and polity.
The most ancient city is the cosmos itself. The law is the logos that governs it. Rational beings belong to a community older than Rome, older than Greece, older than humanity, the community of reason that structures the universe. Following that reason, participating in that order, is the proper end of every rational act. This catalog of self-violence is sobering. How often do we vex ourselves at what happened, turn from others or move to harm them, let pleasure or pain overpower us, say things we don't mean, act without purpose? Marcus would say, constantly. We damage ourselves constantly. The meditation is a mirror. Look at the ways you commit violence against your own soul. Then stop. The Theophrastus comparison. The final meditation of Book 2 makes a surprising ethical argument.
In the comparison of sins, which is made by Theophrastus in accordance with the common notions of mankind, sins committed through desire are more blameworthy than those committed through anger. For he who is excited by anger seems to turn away from reason with a certain pain and unconscious contraction. But he who sins through desire, being overpowered by pleasure, seems to be in a manner more intemperate and womanish in his sins.
Theophrastus was Aristotle's successor as head of the Peripatetic school. The reference shows Marcus engaging with multiple philosophical traditions, not just Stoicism. The argument is that sins of desire are worse than sins of anger. Why? Anger involves pain. The angry person is suffering. Their action is a response to perceived injury. There's something almost involuntary about it. They're swept away. Desire, by contrast, involves pleasure. The person sinning through desire is pursuing gratification. They're not suffering. They're indulging. This makes desire-driven sin more culpable because it's more chosen, more deliberate, more fully an expression of character. The phrase womanish in his sins reflects ancient gender prejudice. The Greeks and Romans associated self-control with masculinity and self-indulgence with femininity. Modern readers will rightly reject this association while still considering the underlying philosophical point about different types of wrongdoing.
Rightly then, and in a way worthy of philosophy, Theophrastus said that the offence which is committed with pleasure is more blameworthy than that which is committed with pain, and on the whole, the one is more like a person who has first been wronged, and through pain is compelled to be angry, but the other is moved by his own impulse to do wrong, being carried towards doing something by desire.
The elaboration clarifies. The angry person responds to perceived wrong. Something happened to them. They react. There's a kind of justice in their motivation, even if their action is disproportionate. The desiring person acts from pure self-motivation. Nothing happened to them. They simply want something and pursue it wrongfully. The internal origin makes it worse. This isn't how modern ethics typically thinks about wrongdoing. We might say the consequences matter more than the motivation. We might say addiction complicates the picture of desire. But Marcus finds value in Theophrastus's distinction. It suggests that desire requires more vigilance than anger. Anger flares and fades. Desire persists and plots.
Thus, concluding Book 2, we have the teaching whole. Expect difficult people, and don't be disturbed. Keep death always before you as clarifier. Locate yourself in your ruling reason, where nothing external can touch you. Recognize that time will erase everything but character, and maintain vigilance over desire more even than over anger.
That's my summary, not Marcus's words, but it captures the arc of Book 2. From the morning preparation through the meditations on death and impermanence to the final analysis of desire and anger, Marcus has laid out a complete practice. The practices aren't separate techniques but aspects of one integrated discipline. Now we step back from the text itself to explore its philosophical dimensions more fully. 3 areas deserve particular attention: the discipline of assent, Stoic psychology, and cross-cultural parallels with both Buddhist and Taoist thought. The discipline of assent. The Stoics divided philosophy into 3 areas: logic, physics, and ethics. Corresponding to these were 3 disciplines: assent, desire, and action. Book 2 emphasizes the discipline of assent. So what is assent? When an impression arises in your mind, you can accept it as true, reject it as false, or suspend judgment. This acceptance or rejection is assent. The Stoics called impressions phantasiae. Some impressions are purely sensory. You see red, you feel pain. Others are cognitive. The impression that someone has insulted you, that something bad is happening, that you need to respond. The crucial insight is that impressions include judgments. When you feel insulted, the impression isn't just sensory data, it includes the judgment, this person's words constitute an insult, and perhaps being insulted is bad, and I should respond with anger. These judgments are embedded in the initial impression, and you often assent to them before noticing they're there. The discipline of assent involves slowing down, catching the impression before you've automatically accepted it, and examining the embedded judgments. Is this actually an insult? Is being insulted actually bad? Is anger actually appropriate? By questioning the judgments, you create a gap between stimulus and response. Marcus practices this throughout Book 2. When difficult people appear, he doesn't just feel irritated. He examines the impression. Why does their behavior bother me? What judgment am I making about them? Is that judgment accurate? By making the implicit explicit, he gains freedom. Epictetus, Marcus's primary teacher through his writings, put it memorably.
It is not things that disturb us, but our judgments about things. Death, for example, is nothing dreadful, or else Socrates, too, would have thought so. What is dreadful is the judgment that death is dreadful.
The thing itself, whether death or insult or loss, is neutral. The disturbance comes from the judgment added to the thing. Change the judgment and you change the disturbance. This doesn't mean pretending bad things are good. It means accurately assessing what's actually bad. For the Stoics, only vice is bad. Everything else is preferred or dispreferred, but not truly good or bad. In Book 2, Marcus applies this to the people he'll encounter. The busybody isn't bad. Their behavior is preferred or dispreferred. My judgment that they're ruining my day is what disturbs me. By examining that judgment, I can withhold assent from it and respond with equanimity. Stoic psychology and the hegemonicon. The Stoics held that the soul is unified, not divided into parts that can conflict with each other. This distinguishes them from Plato, who divided the soul into reason, spirit, and appetite, and from later thinkers who posited unconscious drives opposing conscious intentions. For the Stoics, what seems like internal conflict is actually confusion. There aren't two parts of you, one wanting virtue and one wanting vice. There's one unified soul making judgments, some of which are contradictory because they're unclear. When you seem to fight with yourself, you're actually working through unclear impressions, trying to determine what's actually true and valuable. The hegemonicon, the ruling reason or commanding faculty, is the soul's center of judgment and choice. It receives impressions, assents, or withholds, and generates impulses to action. It's the you that decides. Marcus locates identity here. The body isn't really you. It can be damaged without damaging you. Externals aren't you. They can be taken without taking you. Only the hegemonicon is truly yours. This psychology enables Stoic ethics. If your ruling reason cannot be harmed except by itself, then others genuinely cannot injure you. They can injure your body, your reputation, your possessions, but they can't injure the only thing that matters. The hegemonicon remains inviolate unless you corrupt it yourself through bad judgments. In Book 2, Marcus reminds himself of this. The difficult people can do what they will to externals. His task is to maintain his hegemonicon uncorrupted. As long as he judges truly and responds virtuously, nothing that happens to him constitutes harm in the philosophically precise sense. The parallels between Stoicism and Buddhism strike many readers. Both traditions emerged during the Axial Age, a period roughly from 800 to 200 BCE when major philosophical and religious developments occurred across multiple civilizations independently. The Stoics and early Buddhists never met, yet they arrived at remarkably similar insights. Consider the Buddhist teaching of the three marks of existence: anicca, impermanence; anatta, non-self; and dukkha, suffering or unsatisfactoriness. Marcus's meditations on the stream of existence correspond closely to anicca. Everything flows, nothing remains. The body and soul are temporary configurations of elements that will dissolve. The Stoic critique of attachment to externals resonates with anicca. The self you think you are, constituted by your possessions, your reputation, your body, isn't the true self. For Buddhists, there is no true self at all. The doctrine is more radical. For Stoics, the true self exists, but it's limited to the hegemonikon, the rational faculty. Both traditions agree that most of what we identify with is not self, not truly us. And dukkha, the pervasive unsatisfactoriness of conditioned existence, appears throughout Book 2. The pleasures we chase don't satisfy. The fame we seek is empty. Even achieving what we desire brings no lasting fulfillment. The Buddhist diagnosis is that craving itself is the problem. The Stoic diagnosis is that false judgments about value are the problem. The practical implication is similar: stop chasing what doesn't satisfy. The Buddhist practice of mindfulness, paying close attention to present experience without adding judgment, parallels the Stoic discipline of assent. Both involve slowing down automatic reactions, examining what's actually present, and distinguishing the raw experience from the stories we add to it. Both aim at freedom from reactive patterns. The Buddha's advice about mental states also echoes Marcus.
Mind is the forerunner of all actions. All deeds are led by mind, created by mind. If one speaks or acts with a corrupt mind, suffering follows as the wheel follows the hoof of an ox pulling a cart.
Compare Marcus. Our life is what our thoughts make it. Both traditions place mental discipline at the center of practice. Both believe that transforming the mind transforms everything else. Less commonly noted but equally striking are the parallels between Stoicism and Taoism. The Taoist tradition, emerging from ancient China, developed its own philosophy of acceptance, naturalness, and transcendence of ordinary concerns. Consider the Taoist concept of Wu Wei, often translated as non-action or effortless action. Wu Wei doesn't mean doing nothing. It means acting without forcing, without struggle against the natural flow of events. The sage acts, but their action accords with the way things are moving anyway. They don't impose their will against reality. They participate in reality's own movement. Marcus's acceptance of fate resonates with Wu Wei. He doesn't counsel passivity. He led armies, made decisions, governed an empire, but he tried to do so without attachment to particular outcomes, without the struggle that comes from wanting reality to be other than it is. Accept what comes. Act as your nature requires, and don't exhaust yourself fighting the inevitable. The Tao Te Ching attributed to Lao Tzu expresses this.
Do that which consists in taking no action, and order will prevail. The sage manages affairs without action and spreads doctrines without words.
Without action doesn't mean literal inactivity. It means without the kind of striving that creates its own obstacles. Marcus tries to govern without the agitation that makes governing exhausting. He tries to face difficulty without the resistance that makes difficulty worse. Consider also the Taoist teaching on impermanence. The Tao Te Ching opens with the recognition that the Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. Everything manifest is temporary, including the words and concepts we use to discuss reality. This resonates with Marcus's catalogs of transience. Names fade, concepts shift, only the underlying pattern persists. Zhuangzi, the other great Taoist sage, offers meditations on death that parallel Marcus strikingly.
The great cloud burdens me with form, labors me with life, eases me in old age, and rests me in death. So, if I think well of my life, for the same reason I must think well of my death.
The great clod is Zhuangzi's irreverent term for nature, or the cosmos. The logic is perfect. If you approve of living, you should approve of dying. Since both are expressions of the same natural process, Marcus makes the same move. Death is dissolution of elements, return to the source. If you accept your composition, accept your decomposition. Zhuangzi also challenges the fear of death through dream imagery.
Once Zhuangzi dreamed he was a butterfly flitting and fluttering around, happy with himself and doing as he pleased. He didn't know he was Zhuangzi. Suddenly he woke up and there he was, solid and unmistakable Zhuangzi. But he didn't know if he was Zhuangzi who had dreamt he was a butterfly, or a butterfly, dreaming he was Zhuangzhou.
Marcus calls what belongs to the soul a dream in vapor. Both thinkers use dream imagery to loosen our grip on what seems solid. If you can't distinguish dream from waking with certainty, then the stakes of waking life seem less absolute. Death might be another shift of states, like waking from a dream into a different dream. The Taoist ideal of the sage who remains unmoved by circumstances also parallels Stoic equanimity. Zhuangzi describes sages who could walk through fire without feeling heat, through water without feeling wet. These are metaphors for psychological invulnerability. The sage doesn't lack sensation, they lack disturbance. External circumstances pass through them without sticking. Marcus aims at exactly this. The insults pass through, the losses pass through, the body's pains register but don't dominate. The ruling reason remains centered while externals do what externals do. Returning to Marcus's direct Stoic lineage, we must consider Epictetus more fully. Marcus never met Epictetus in person, but he read his works extensively, likely the Discourses and certainly the Handbook, in Enchiridion. Epictetus's central teaching is the dichotomy of control. Some things are up to us and some things are not. Up to us are our judgments, impulses, desires, and aversions. Not up to us are our bodies, possessions, reputations, and positions. Freedom comes from focusing on what's up to us and accepting what isn't.
Some things are within our power, while others are not. Within our power are opinion, motivation, desire, aversion, and, in a word, whatever is of our own doing. Not within our power are our body, our property, reputation, office, and, in a word, whatever is not of our own doing. Things within our power are by nature free, unhindered, unimpeded. Things not within our power are weak, servile, subject to hindrance, dependent on others.
This passage opens Epictetus's Handbook. It's the foundation of everything that follows. Book 2 of the Meditations is Marcus applying this teaching to his own life. The morning preparation. Difficult people are not within Marcus's power. His response is, the meditation on death. When and how he dies is not within his power. How he relates to death is. The critique of fame. Others' opinions are not within his power. His own integrity is. But Marcus adapts Epictetus to his imperial circumstances. Epictetus was a former slave who taught in relative obscurity. Marcus was emperor. For Epictetus, the things not within power could largely be ignored. For Marcus, they required constant attention. He couldn't ignore the armies, the administration, the endless demands of ruling. He had to engage with things not up to him while maintaining inner freedom. This makes Marcus's achievement impressive. He practices Stoicism at the highest level of responsibility, where the temptation to believe you control externals is greatest. An emperor might convince himself that his will is law, that he can determine outcomes, that his power is real. Marcus refuses this illusion. He knows that even emperors can't control what others do, what plagues accomplish, what the future brings. Behind all of Marcus's particular practices lies a cosmological conviction. The universe is rational. Logos pervades everything. Providence orders events. What happens is meant to happen. This belief is essential to Stoic practice. If the universe were chaotic, acceptance would be surrender to meaninglessness. If events were random, equanimity would be mere resignation. But if everything unfolds according to reason, then acceptance becomes alignment with wisdom, and equanimity becomes recognition of cosmic order. Marcus holds this belief but doesn't argue for it extensively. He assumes it, as educated Romans of his background typically did. Modern readers may not share the same assumption. Does Stoic practice still work without Stoic cosmology? Possibly. You might accept what happens not because it's providentially ordered, but because resisting the past is pointless regardless. You might maintain equanimity not because the universe is rational, but because disturbance doesn't help and harms you. The practices might be defensible on purely pragmatic grounds. But something is lost if the cosmology goes. Marcus doesn't just accept fate, he loves it. He doesn't just tolerate what happens, he embraces it as his own. This is amor fati, or love of fate, which becomes explicit in later Stoic thought and in Nietzsche's appropriation of the concept. Without belief in providential order, fate becomes something to endure rather than love. For Marcus himself, the cosmology was essential. He believed in the logos, in providence, in the rational structure of reality. This belief made acceptance feel like participation in something divine rather than submission to something indifferent. Whether modern readers can share that belief, or whether they should try, remains an open question. Practical application. How do we take what Marcus wrote nearly 2,000 years ago and make it work in a life lived today? The circumstances differ vastly. Most of us aren't commanding armies on frozen frontiers. We're not responsible for millions of subjects. We don't face Marcus's particular pressures. And yet the human predicament remains recognizable. We still wake to anticipate difficulty. We still fear death. We still care too much about what others think. The practices Marcus developed can be adapted, and I want to offer you specific exercises to try. The morning preparation, a complete practice. Start here. This is Marcus's most famous practice, and for good reason. It works. Tomorrow morning, before you check your phone, before you look at email, before you engage with anyone, sit up in bed and take 30 seconds. Say to yourself silently or aloud, "Today I will encounter people who are difficult. Someone will be self-absorbed. Someone will be ungrateful. Someone will be dishonest or envious or simply unpleasant. This is certain. These people act this way because they don't understand what's truly good. They're not evil. They're confused. And they're my kin. We share the same rational nature, the same capacity for better. I cannot control their behavior. I can only control my response." That's the basic practice. Here's how to deepen it. First, be specific. Don't just anticipate difficult people in general. Think about your actual day. Who will you encounter? Your demanding supervisor, your critical parent, your competitive colleague? Name them, at least to yourself. Marcus probably had specific faces in mind when he wrote, "The busybody, the ungrateful, arrogant." The practice gains power when it's concrete, and second, extend the diagnosis. Marcus says difficult people act from ignorance of what is good and evil. Try to imagine this for the specific person you'll face. What false belief drives their behavior? The micromanager might believe that control produces safety. The ungrateful person might believe that acknowledging help diminishes them. The arrogant one might believe that superiority is the only protection against inferiority. These beliefs are wrong, but they're understandable. Seeing the belief behind the behavior changes your relationship to the behavior. Third, prepare your response. Having anticipated the difficulty, decide in advance how you'll handle it. Not in detail, since you can't know exactly what will happen, but in principle. When my supervisor criticizes my work harshly, I will listen for what's useful, note my emotional response without acting on it, and respond with measured professionalism. Having a plan reduces the likelihood of being hijacked by emotion in the moment. Fourth, do it every day for a week. One morning isn't enough. The practice needs repetition to become habitual. By the fourth or fifth day, you'll likely notice a change. The difficult encounters don't disappear, but their charge diminishes. You saw them coming. They're not ambushes. You can respond rather than react. Working with the view from above, an expanded exercise. When something upsets you, try Marcus's cosmic perspective. This takes practice, but it's learnable. Here's a structured approach. Step 1. Physical zoom out. Close your eyes. Visualize yourself from above, as if from a drone hovering over your building. See the roof, the street, the neighborhood. Keep ascending. Your city becomes visible, then your region, your country, the continent. The Earth appears as a blue marble in blackness. Keep going if you can. See the Earth as a tiny dot among planets, our solar system as a speck in the Milky Way, our galaxy as one among billions. From that height, locate your problem, the insult you received, the money you lost, the opportunity that passed you by. Can you see it? Of course not. It's invisible from sufficient distance, not because it doesn't matter to you, but because its scale is what it is. Step 2. Temporal zoom out. Now shift from space to time. Where was this problem 100 years ago? It didn't exist because you didn't exist. The people involved weren't born. The circumstances hadn't arisen. 100 years before that, the very buildings where it happened might not have even existed. Now look forward in time. Where will this problem be 100 years from now? Gone entirely. No trace. The people involved all dead. The circumstances completely changed. 100 years after that, not even memory of memory. Your urgency today will be invisible tomorrow. Step 3. Pattern recognition. Having zoomed out in space and time, now zoom in differently. Notice that the pattern of your problem has occurred countless times before. People have felt this exact frustration, this exact loss, this exact disappointment for millennia. You're not experiencing something unique. You're experiencing the human condition. Marcus writes about the times of Vespasian and Trajan, seeing the same patterns repeat. People marrying, raising children, getting sick, dying, fighting, celebrating. The names change, the patterns persist. Your problem is one more instance of a pattern as old as humanity. Step 4. The question. Return to normal awareness and ask yourself, given all this, how do I want to respond? Not how do I automatically respond, but how do I choose to respond? The cosmic view doesn't solve problems, it restores proportion and opens choice. From the vantage point of sufficient distance, options appear that weren't visible when you were too close. This practice takes time to develop. Don't expect immediate mastery, but even partial success produces partial benefit. Even remembering for a moment that your problem is small, brief, and patterned creates breathing room. The practice of memento mori. 3 variations. Marcus returns to death constantly. We can do the same carefully. Here are 3 variations of the practice, ranging from gentle to intense. Variation 1. The evening review. At the end of each day before sleep, take a moment to consider that you might not wake. This isn't paranoia, it's statistical reality. Most mornings you will wake, but one morning you won't, and you don't know which one. Ask yourself, if tomorrow was that morning, how would I evaluate today? Did I spend my time on what matters? Did I say what needed saying? Did I love the people I love? Did I do work worth doing? Was I kind when I could have been kind? The practice isn't designed to produce fear, it's designed to produce clarity. Death reveals priorities. What would you regret not having done? What would you be glad you did? Let those answers inform tomorrow. Variation 2. The year of life. A more intense version. Imagine you've been told you have 1 year to live, not hypothetically, but as a genuine diagnosis. What changes? Some things become more precious. Time with people you love, work that feels meaningful, beauty you might otherwise rush past. Other things become less important. Grudges that don't matter, achievements that don't satisfy, others' opinions that were never your business anyway. Make a list. What would you do more of in your final year? What would you do less of? What would you stop entirely? Now consider, why aren't you living that way now? Is the 1-year deadline really what makes those choices right? Marcus writes, do not act as if you were going to live 10,000 years. Death hangs over you. While you live, while it is in your power, be good. The practice of imagining limited time isn't about producing anxiety. It's about living as if time matters, because it does. Variation 3. The deathbed test. When you're in the grip of a strong emotion, especially anger or desire, pause and project forward. Imagine yourself on your deathbed, looking back at this moment. How will the choice you're about to make appear from there? The insult that enrages you now. Will you be glad you expressed that anger, or will it seem like a waste of your limited time? The desire that pulls you towards something you know isn't good. Will you be glad you indulged, or will it seem like another occasion when you knew better and chose worse? The deathbed test doesn't tell you what to do. It clarifies stakes. Some choices still seem right from the deathbed perspective. Others dissolve immediately. The test helps you distinguish. Examining impressions. A step-by-step method. The discipline of assent is the most sophisticated practice and requires the most training, but even beginners can make progress with a structured approach. Step 1. Notice the disturbance. The first skill is catching yourself. You're going along normally and then you're not. Something has disturbed you. Anger rises, fear grips, hurt spreads. Before you can work with the disturbance, you have to notice it's happening. This is harder than it sounds. We often merge with our emotions, becoming the anger rather than someone experiencing anger. Training attention, perhaps through meditation or simple mindfulness exercises, helps develop the witness capacity. With practice, you start catching disturbances earlier, sometimes at the first flutter rather than after full explosion. Step 2. Name the emotion. Once you've noticed the disturbance, name it simply. I'm feeling angry. I'm feeling afraid. I'm feeling hurt. I'm feeling jealous. Just the naming creates distance. You're not the anger. You're someone observing anger arise. Use a factual tone, as if reporting weather. There is anger here. This isn't suppression. You're not pushing the emotion away. You're just not letting it consume you entirely. The emotion remains, but you're not lost in it. Step 3. Identify the embedded judgment. Here's where the Stoic analysis becomes practical. Emotions aren't just feelings. They include judgments. Anger usually contains the judgment, I've been wronged and this matters. Fear contains something bad is coming. Hurt contains I deserved better than this. Jealousy contains they have what I should have. Ask yourself, what judgment is embedded in this feeling? Make the implicit explicit. Write it down if that helps. The judgment behind my anger is, my colleague disrespected me and being disrespected is intolerable. Step 4. Examine the judgment. Now interrogate. Is the judgment true? Your colleague said something sharp? Did they intend disrespect, or were they just stressed? Even if they intended disrespect, is being disrespected actually intolerable? You've survived disrespect before. The world didn't end. What makes this instance unbearable? Go further. Is your colleague's disrespect even up to you? Can you control what they think or say? The Stoic answer is no. You can control your response, not their behavior. If that's true, why spend emotional energy on what you can't control? You don't have to answer definitively. Just raising the questions loosens the grip. The automatic connection between colleague said something sharp and I must be angry gets interrupted. Alternatives appear. Step 5. Choose your response. Having examined the judgment, you now have options. You can still choose anger if that seems right, but you're choosing from freedom, not compulsion. Often, having examined the judgment, the anger dissipates on its own. It required the judgment's unquestioned validity to sustain itself. Once questioned, it weakens. This takes practice. At first, you'll catch yourself only after you've already reacted. That's fine. Do the examination afterward. What judgment was I assenting to? Was it accurate? Over time, the gap widens. You'll catch yourself mid-reaction. Eventually, you might catch the impression before you assent at all. That's mastery. Few reach it. But progress is possible, and progress is enough. The kinship practice. One more exercise drawn from Marcus's morning preparation but applicable throughout the day. When someone frustrates you, silently say, "This person is my kin. We share rational nature. They act from ignorance, not malice. I don't have to approve of their behavior, but I don't have to hate them either. They're doing the best they can with what they understand." This isn't about becoming a doormat. You can still set boundaries, decline requests, protect yourself from harm, but you do so without the added burden of hatred. You respond to behavior without condemning the person. This is surprisingly difficult. We want to believe that difficult people are fundamentally different from us, that their failures are character while ours are circumstance. The kinship practice refuses that convenient fiction. Try it for a day. Every time someone irritates you, silently invoke kinship. My kin. Acting from ignorance as I so often do. Notice what changes. Usually the irritation softens, not because the behavior is okay, but because you're not adding a story of enemy and warfare to the already present difficulty. Finally, if you found any of these techniques useful or would like to know more, feel free to drop me an email. I'd love to hear from you. Okay, let's take a look at some of the translation challenges in Book 2. Book 2 presents several translation challenges that affect interpretation. Let's begin with the most important, the opening passage, which we've discussed throughout this episode. Different translators make different choices, and each choice shapes how we understand Marcus's practice. The Gregory Hayes translation, which has become the most widely read in recent decades, opens this way.
When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they can't tell good from evil.
Hayes uses meddling for the first character type and surly for the last. His language is direct, almost conversational. The translation reads quickly, feels contemporary. Now compare the older translation by Maxwell Staniforth.
Begin each day by telling yourself, today I shall be meeting with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness.
Staniforth uses interference rather than meddling, insolence rather than arrogant, and selfishness for what Hayes calls surly. The diction is more elevated, more formal. The Martin Hammond translation, published by Penguin, takes yet another approach.
Say to yourself first thing in the morning, today I shall meet with people who are meddling, ungrateful, aggressive, treacherous, malicious, unsocial.
Hammond uses aggressive where Hayes has arrogant, and unsocial where both Hayes and Staniforth have different terms. The Greek word at issue here is oikoinos, which literally means not common or not communal. Hayes renders it surly, focusing on emotional disposition. Staniforth chooses selfishness, emphasizing the ethical dimension. Hammond's unsocial stays closer to the Greek root but sounds awkward in English. Each choice reflects a different interpretive decision about what Marcus meant. The word translated as busybody or meddling in the opening passage is the Greek polypragmon. It literally means one who does many things but carries negative connotations of meddling, of involving oneself in others' affairs. Different translators render it differently. Busybody, meddler, interfering person, intrusive. The nuance matters. A busybody sounds almost comical, perhaps a gossiping neighbor. A meddler sounds more insidious, someone actively disrupting your business. Marcus probably means someone who won't respect boundaries, who insists on involvement where they're not needed or wanted. The term hegemonikon, which I've been translating as ruling reason or commanding faculty, has no perfect English equivalent. Mind is too broad and carries different philosophical connotations. Soul suggests religious meanings the Greek lacks. Ruling part is literal but clunky. Commanding faculty is accurate but technical. Some translators simply leave it untranslated. The hegemonikon is the you that decides, that assents or withholds assent, that chooses how to respond. It's more specific than consciousness but less specific than will. English lacks the word because English doesn't have the Stoic psychology that generated it. The passage about Theophrastus near the end poses particular difficulties. The argument about sins of desire versus sins of anger is compressed, and different editors arrange the sentences differently. Some place Theophrastus's name in different positions, affecting whether Marcus is agreeing with him or merely reporting his view. The reference to womanish reflects prejudices of the time. Most modern translators include notes acknowledging this. The philosophical point about pleasures-driven wrongdoing being worse than pain-driven wrongdoing is separable from the gendered language, but the original text contains both. The famous phrase "smell and blood in a bag" also presents translation choices. Let's see how different translators handle this deliberately crude passage. Hayes translates,
like seeing roasted meat and other dishes in front of you and suddenly realizing this is a dead fish, a dead bird, a dead pig.
Hayes continues the deflation technique with further examples, stripping away the appetizing presentation to reveal what's actually there. The long translation is more austere.
Altogether, the intercourse of man with nature and with the mass of blood and bones which form his body is but as a vessel of blood.
Long's vessel of blood is more dignified than bag of blood, but the therapeutic punch is weaker. Marcus's original is deliberately crude. He's trying to deflate attachment to the body by seeing it unromantically. Softening the translation softens the therapeutic effect. Let's now touch on the several scholarly debates that surround Book 2. First, the authenticity and placement of the geographical headings. Among the Quadi on the Gran appears in some manuscripts, but not all. If authentic, it tells us when and where Book 2 was written. If added later by copyists who believed they knew the circumstances of composition, it tells us only about later beliefs, not Marcus's actual situation. Most scholars accept the heading as probably authentic, since the specificity of detail seems unlikely as invention. But certainty isn't possible with texts transmitted through centuries of copying. Second, the ordering of the meditations themselves. Marcus didn't number them. Later editors divided the text into discrete entries, and the numbering varies between editions. The Long translation numbers differently than the Hayes translation, which numbers differently than the Staniforth. But another edition might place that content differently. The divisions are interpretive acts, not features of the original manuscript. Third, the relationship between the Meditations and Marcus's other writings. We know Marcus corresponded extensively with his rhetoric teacher Fronto. Those letters survive and show a very different voice, warmer, more personal, more concerned with style and expression, less philosophical. Some scholars see the Meditations as Marcus's private self and the letters as his public self. Others argue the Meditations represent a particular genre, a spiritual exercise with its own conventions, and shouldn't be read as straightforward self-disclosure. The truth is probably complicated. The Meditations show a constructed philosophical self, but that construction reveals something real about what Marcus was working on. Fourth, the degree of originality in Marcus's philosophy. Much of what he writes can be traced to earlier Stoic sources, especially Epictetus. Is Marcus simply repeating what his teachers taught, or is he transforming the tradition through personal application? The answer is probably both. The doctrines are inherited. The tone, the specific applications, the integration with imperial life, the personal struggles revealed in the repetition, these are Marcus's own contribution. He's not a philosopher in the sense of developing new arguments. He's a practitioner bringing existing wisdom to life in extreme circumstances. Fifth, the audience question. Marcus writes to himself, but did he expect others to read? The traditional view holds that the Meditations were private, never intended for publication, and only preserved by chance. Some recent scholars question this, noting that Marcus's contemporaries would have known he was writing, that no elaborate measures for secrecy appear, and that the philosophical genre of self-examination had public as well as private expressions. We can't know Marcus's intentions with certainty. What we can say is that the Meditations read as private, as one man working through difficulties without concern for how he'll appear to others. Whether that appearance reflects reality or careful construction remains debatable. A fair reading of Book 2 requires acknowledging where Marcus's analysis seems inadequate or problematic. His treatment of anger oversimplifies. Anger can be a moral response to genuine injustice. The claim that difficult people act from ignorance, while sometimes true, isn't always true. Some people know they're doing wrong and do it anyway. Psychopaths exist. Exploitation isn't always confused. Marcus's diagnosis works for many cases but fails for the worst ones. His cosmology, the belief in a rational, providential universe, is precisely that, a belief. Modern readers may or may not share it. Without that cosmological foundation, some of his arguments lose force. If the universe is indifferent rather than rationally ordered, then accepting what nature brings becomes less compelling. Why accept what's merely random? You might fight randomness rather than embrace it. His focus on individual psychology neglects structural factors. Marcus can tell himself that others' behavior doesn't affect his inner citadel, but what about systematic injustice that affects not just attitudes but material conditions? Stoicism has been criticized as a philosophy for those with enough privilege to focus on their interior states. The slave, the impoverished, the systematically oppressed might have different priorities than equanimity. They might need liberation before they can practice acceptance. His gender assumptions visible in the Theophrastus passage reflect his culture's prejudices. The association of self-indulgence with femininity was standard in ancient thought, but is obviously wrong. Modern readers can extract the philosophical point while rejecting the gendered framing, but the original text contains both. His attitude toward the body is complicated. The smell and blood in a bag language serves therapeutic purposes, but taken too far, it suggests contempt for physicality that some find troubling. The body isn't just an encumbrance, it's also the site of sensation, pleasure, connection. Marcus's deflating language might help release unhealthy attachments, but it might also encourage unhealthy dissociation. These limitations don't invalidate Marcus's insights. They contextualize them. Book 2 offers profound wisdom about managing one's responses to difficulty. It doesn't offer a complete account of ethics, politics, or metaphysics. Reading it well means taking what's useful and remaining critical about the rest. Book 2 establishes themes that will recur throughout the meditations. Having read it closely, we're now equipped to recognize patterns as they develop. But first, let's look back to Book 1 and see how the teachers Marcus thanked prepared him for everything we've encountered today. Remember what Marcus wrote about Apollonius in Book 1?
From Apollonius, I learned freedom of will and undeviating steadiness of purpose, and to look to nothing else, not even for a moment, except to reason, and to be always the same, in sharp pains, on the occasion of the loss of a child, and in long illness.
That undeviating steadiness of purpose is exactly what Book 2's morning preparation requires. You can only anticipate difficult people calmly if you possess the steadiness Apollonius modeled. The reference to being always the same in sharp pains and on the occasion of the loss of a child becomes poignant when we remember Marcus lost children during the very campaigns when he wrote Book 2. He's practicing what Apollonius taught in circumstances as severe as any Apollonius faced. From Sextus, Marcus learned something that directly enables the kinship practice we explored today.
From Sextus, a benevolent disposition, and the example of a family governed by its head, and the idea of living conformably to nature, and gravity without affectation, and to look carefully after the interests of friends, and to tolerate ignorant persons, and those who form opinions without consideration.
To tolerate ignorant persons and those who form opinions without consideration. That's Book 2's difficult people in different words. When Marcus describes the busybody, the ungrateful, the arrogant, and then reminds himself they act from ignorance of good and evil, he's applying what Sextus demonstrated. The benevolent disposition doesn't come naturally. It was taught, modeled, and absorbed over years. Book 2 shows Marcus still working to maintain it. And then there's Maximus, whose influence pervades Book 2's teachings on equanimity.
From Maximus, I learned self-government, and not to be led aside by anything, and cheerfulness in all circumstances, as well as in illness, and a just admixture in the moral character of sweetness and dignity, and to do what was set before me without complaining.
Not to be led aside by anything. That's the discipline of assent in personal terms. Cheerfulness in all circumstances as well as in illness. That's the equanimity Marcus aims for when contemplating death and dissolution. To do what was set before me without complaining. That's the reluctant awakening, the rising to duty despite preferring sleep. Every practice in Book 2 has roots in Book 1's gratitude. The teachers gave Marcus the tools. Book 2 shows him using them under pressure. Looking forward, the morning preparation reappears in various forms. In Book 5, Marcus will write about how to rise from bed when you don't want to, reminding himself that he was made for work, not for comfort. The passage echoes Book 2's sense of duty, overcoming reluctance. In Book 8, he'll describe the preparation in even more detail, listing specific types of difficult behavior to expect. The practice isn't mentioned once and dropped. It's a recurring exercise, refined over time, apparently never fully mastered. The meditation on death intensifies as the meditations progress. Book 2 introduces the theme with passages about impermanence and dissolution. By Books 4 and 6, Marcus contemplates death at length, imagining specific scenarios, naming specific dead emperors and philosophers, pushing himself toward genuine acceptance rather than mere intellectual acknowledgement. What we've seen here is the foundation. The increasingly urgent building comes later. The critique of fame develops as well. Book 2 establishes that fame is worthless because the rememberers will die. Later books will explore the psychology of fame-seeking more deeply. Why do we want to be remembered? What emptiness are we trying to fill? What would actually satisfy? Marcus doesn't just dismiss fame. He investigates its appeal, trying to uproot the desire at its source rather than merely suppressing it. The Stoic psychology of impressions and assent, introduced here through practice, becomes explicit in later books. Marcus will write entire meditations on how to examine impressions, how to strip them of added judgments, how to maintain the gap between stimulus and response. Book 2 gestures toward this practice. Later books develop the technique in detail, offering specific instructions for specific situations. The meditations form a unified work, not a random collection. Book 2 builds on Book 1 and prepares for what follows. Reading in sequence reveals connections that reading isolated passages misses. This is why we're going through the text in order, giving each book the attention it deserves, allowing the whole to emerge from the parts. Next time, we enter Book 3. The manuscript heading for Book 3 reads at Carnuntum. Carnuntum was a major Roman legionary fortress on the Danube, in what is now Austria. If the heading is authentic, Book 3 was written slightly later than Book 2, perhaps 172 or 173 CE as the war continued, and Marcus moved between frontier positions. Book 3 is short, like Book 2, but its focus shifts. Where Book 2 emphasized mortality and the discipline of assent, Book 3 turns more directly to the question of how to use time. Marcus writes with increasing urgency about the brevity of life and the importance of philosophical practice. He introduces the concept of living according to nature more fully and grapples with what that means for someone whose nature includes being emperor, a role he never sought but cannot escape.
We ought to consider not only that our life is daily wasting away, and a smaller part of it is left, but another thing also must be taken into the account, that if a man should live longer, it is quite uncertain whether the understanding will still continue sufficient for the comprehension of things.
That's from Book 3. Marcus worries not just about death, but about decline. What if he lives but loses his faculties? What if he has time but not capacity? The urgency intensifies. It's not enough to have years ahead, you need the mental clarity to use them well. This anxiety about decline will recur throughout the meditations. Marcus is in his 50s during these campaigns. He's watching himself age while managing enormous responsibilities. The philosophical stakes couldn't feel higher. We'll also encounter in Book 3 one of Marcus's most beautiful passages about attention to the present moment. He describes how even the byproducts of baking bread, the cracks in the crust, have a kind of beauty, if you look rightly. This might seem a strange topic for an emperor at war, but it connects to everything he's been developing. The practice of seeing clearly, the cultivation of acceptance, the recognition that every moment offers something if you're present to receive it. Before we get there, though, I want to hear from you. How did Book 2 land with you? Did the morning preparation resonate, or does it seem a little too pessimistic or too focused on difficulty? Have you tried any of the practices I described, and if so, what happened when you did? What questions arose as you listened? And is there anything you'd like me to explore in more detail? Send your thoughts to the primary text at maaoot.org. That's the primary text at maaoot.org. Your responses genuinely shape this podcast. Philosophy is dialogue, and I'm only one voice. The tradition we're exploring was built through conversation, through teachers and students questioning each other, through writers responding to writers across centuries. When you write in, you're continuing that conversation. I take your questions seriously, and they often change how I think about the texts we're reading. We've spent substantial time with Book 2, and rightly so. In 17 brief meditations, Marcus establishes the core practices that will sustain him through the remaining 10 books. The morning preparation for difficult people, the confrontation with mortality, the stripping away of fame's illusions, the location of true selfhood in the ruling reason, the discipline of assent that allows freedom between stimulus and response, the cosmic perspective that restores proportion, the kinship that replaces hatred. These aren't ideas Marcus invented. He received them from his teachers, from Rusticus and Maximus and Apollonius, from the Stoic tradition stretching back centuries through Epictetus, through Seneca and Musonius Rufus, through the Roman Stoa, all the way to Zeno of Citium in the 4th century BCE. But in Book 2, Marcus makes them his own. He applies them to his specific circumstances, the frontier, the war, the plague, the weight of empire, the aging body, and the relentless demands all this brings. He writes not as a teacher instructing others, but as a student reminding himself. The difference is what makes this book stand out. These are notes from the struggle, not proclamations from the summit. What strikes me most about Book 2 is its honesty. Marcus doesn't pretend he's mastered these teachings. The very fact that he writes them down betrays ongoing struggle. You don't remind yourself of what you've fully absorbed. The meditations exist because Marcus keeps forgetting what he knows. He wakes to dread difficult people despite having understood that they act from ignorance. He fears death despite having reasoned through why he shouldn't. He craves fame despite having seen its emptiness. He gets angry despite having recognized that others' behavior isn't up to him. This should encourage us. If Marcus Aurelius, with all his philosophical training, all his decades of practice, all his access to the best teachers of his age, still needed to write reminders to himself, then our own struggles are normal. The goal isn't to graduate from the practice. The goal is to keep practicing. Mastery in Stoicism isn't a state you achieve and then possess permanently. It's something you do moment by moment, practice by practice, for as long as you're alive.
Do not act as if you were going to live 10,000 years. Death hangs over you. While you live, while it is in your power, be good.
11 words in the middle. While you live, while it is in your power, be good. The time is now. The capacity is yours. The task is goodness. Everything else is commentary. We don't know how many days we have. Marcus didn't know. He had perhaps 8 more years after writing Book 2, years filled with continued war, continued plague, continued political crisis, years in which he would need these practices constantly. He couldn't have known that his private notes would survive 2,000 years, would be read by millions, would influence lives he couldn't imagine. He was just trying to get through his day, to wake up on the Danube frontier surrounded by difficulty and death and maintain his character, to face the busybody and the ungrateful and the arrogant without losing himself, to remember that time is short and use it well. So are we, and that's enough. The meditations aren't about achieving perfect wisdom. They're about showing up day after day, trying to think clearly, trying to respond well, and trying to be good. Some days you succeed, some days you fail. Either way, you'll practice again tomorrow. The practice is the point, not some imagined endpoint where the practice becomes unnecessary. If these explorations resonate with you, you might also enjoy Ab Immemorabili, our conversational podcast, where 2 hosts explore transformation through history's wisdom traditions, bringing different perspectives to similar questions. For shorter reflections on Stoic practice, find us on YouTube, where we explore individual teachings in focused episodes you can carry into your day. Or visit MAAOOT.org to learn about our online school, which focuses on ancient philosophy, psychological mastery, and body practices going back over 3,000 years. The wisdom we've touched today is just a fragment of what the Stoics preserved. Entire systems exist for those called to deeper work, for those who want not just to read about these practices, but to work with them under guidance over years. I'll leave you with one more passage from Book 2, the one I return to most often.
Remember that very little is needed to make a happy life.
Very little. Not the fame Marcus didn't seek, not the wealth he already possessed, not the power he wielded reluctantly, not the approval of crowds or the verdict of history. Very little. Correct judgments, virtuous action, acceptance of what comes. These are available to anyone, emperor or slave, ancient or modern, in a military camp on the Danube, or in whatever room you're listening from now. The Stoics believed that happiness, eudaimonia, genuine flourishing, was possible for everyone regardless of external circumstances. This wasn't naive optimism. They knew about suffering, about injustice, about loss. Marcus certainly knew. But they believed that the core of human well-being was internal, located in how we think and act, accessible through practice. Very little is needed. The practice of examining impressions before assenting, the morning preparation for difficulty, the reminder of mortality that clarifies priorities, the recognition of kinship that dissolves hatred, the cosmic perspective that restores proportion. These aren't difficult to understand. They're difficult to practice, but they're available right now wherever you are, whatever circumstances you face. Very little is needed. Very little. Before we close, a brief word. If these episodes have meant something to you, if they've changed how you think about these ancient texts or helped you see their relevance to your own life, There are simple ways you can help us reach more listeners. Leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you're listening to this. Write a comment sharing what resonated with you. Or perhaps most powerfully, introduce this podcast to someone you think would appreciate it. A friend wrestling with difficult colleagues, a family member facing mortality, someone searching for practical wisdom in an overwhelming world. Word of mouth remains how thoughtful content finds its audience. We don't have a marketing department. We have listeners who care enough to share. Thank you for being one of them. The primary texts, complete engagement with philosophy's foundations. I'm Adam. Until next time, keep reading, keep questioning, and keep practicing.